So allow me at this point to introduce our first speaker, Rabbi Justice Marcus Solomon. He was appointed to the Supreme Court of Western Australia on the 4th of August 21. He became the first rabbi to be appointed a Supreme Court Justice in Australia, or indeed anywhere else. He started by reading law at the University of Western Australia. He commenced his legal career in 1991. He completed his articles of clerkship at Dwyer Durack, and from 1992 until 2000, that's where he worked. He became a partner in 1995. From 2000 to 2006, he worked at Gardens Lawyers, where he was managing partner. And in 2006, he joined the independent bar. He was appointed a senior counsel in 2013, undertaking a wide commercial practice until his appointment to the bench. He remains a teacher of Jewish studies, senior rabbi of the Bet Midrash of Western Australia, an institution which is dedicated to advanced Jewish studies and Talmudic law for both children and adults. He is a governor of the Carmel School in Perth, where he's a highly respected rabbi, teacher, and thought leader for that community, and indeed the whole Jewish community of Australia. So it gives me great pleasure to invite Rabbi Solomon to open proceedings this evening.
Thank you, Rabbi Elton. Can you confirm that I can be heard, Rabbi?
I can hear you.
Yes, let's hope that goes for everybody else. Well, good evening all, and thank you for the opportunity to say a few words. I've been asked to speak for about 10 minutes. That is a tall order because this is a very complex and difficult issue. But I'm going to start with a couple of disclaimers. First of all, as a sitting judge, it's not only not my role, but really quite inappropriate for me to be suggesting to anybody whether they should be voting yes or no. So I'm not going to take a side in this debate. My function really is to give some reflections about the Jewish perspective of the issues which the referendum throws up for our consideration. My next disclaimer is that follows on from that, and that is that I don't think really a Jewish law or Jewish values, so to speak, mandate a position one way or the other. And therefore, not only is it inappropriate for me to express a concluded view, but it's not possible for me to express a concluded view about what Judaism would say about such a complex issue. My third disclaimer is that I'm speaking in a room underneath a dance floor at a wedding. And so if there's a thunderous noise, that's unlikely to be applause for what I'm saying. It's more likely to be something that suggests I should shift position. So please excuse me if there's any sudden noise. So let me come immediately to the issue of Jewish perspective. And there's been a fair bit of press about Jewish values, and people have written various things, some of which have garnered some media attention about what Jewish values are and what they might say about this complex issue. My reading of those is that people have an entrenched political position and wade their way through Jewish literature in order to find selected cherry-picked parts of Jewish thought that confirm their own view. We all have a tendency to do that, but what I want to do is return to some perhaps basic and authentic Jewish values and leave it to you to consider how they might impact upon your thoughts on this issue. And really, the topic is so vast that I can do no more than perhaps highlight a few of the issues this evening. But the first thing I want to say is, as much as I don't think Jewish values mandate a position, there is something that I think ought to be said, and that is there's been a bit of press given to the expression of a view that the proposal, the subject of this referendum, is inconsistent with Jewish values. In my view, that proposition is plainly wrong. It simply cannot be said on any measure that this proposition is inconsistent with Jewish values. That doesn't mean you should vote yes, but it certainly doesn't mean that Judaism requires you to vote no. And I want to perhaps say a bit more about that in the discussion about Jewish values. So the first thing about the Jewish perspective is a fairly obvious one. And that is that the Jewish people plainly share a history of dispossession, of persecution and discrimination. And no Jewish person with any knowledge of the Jewish life experience can be anything but overwhelmingly empathetic to the plight and position that First Nations people find themselves in today. I don't think there can really be any controversy about that. There are, however, obvious differences between the Jewish experience and the experience of First Nations people, a subject on which I am no expert. But I have had some dealings with First Nations people. I acted for a few years in the 1990s for two Indigenous tribes in the Pilbara region, which was a very enriching period of my life. And now is not the time to discuss the differences, but can I just perhaps invite your consideration of one? The Jewish people, throughout their years of exile, of persecution, of dispossession, were able to sustain their spiritual heritage, which grounded their sense of self and their sense of identity. In my discussion with First Nations people, history has not been that kind to them. They have, in a very quick period of time historically, been ripped from their spiritual and cultural heritage and thrust into a system in which they had no experience and no knowledge. And the tragic consequences of that are before us. And again, I don't think that's controversial. I think that's simply a fact that we confront in this country and a blight on our nation. I don't expect that that's really anything new to anybody or controversial. But turning to Jewish values beyond that limited but shared experience, there are a couple of things I wanted to focus on. And they're the things that have been the subject of of some of the media discussion and articles. Much of the debate, the respectful debate rather than the silly debate, if I may say so, has been about equality before the law and preferment of one group of people within Australia on the basis of race or on the basis of anything. And I know I've read many of Louise Clegg's very intelligent and articulate and respectfully argued pieces, and I imagine that she'll say something about that this evening. It has been said that equality before the law is a fundamental Jewish value and always has been. And that, of course, is true. But equality before the law is a very complex and nuanced notion. And the law does not treat everyone equally all the time in all circumstances. But again, a very complex matter that is well beyond the scope of this evening's and certainly my short presentation. But I want to invite consideration of the Jewish experience in this sense. The Jewish people were dispossessed from the land to which they were indigenous. That is the land of Israel. When they came back to that land in the late 19th and the first half of the 20th century, they set up a legal system which was enshrined in various documents and continues to evolve, as we know from the very contentious issues that are happening in Israel now. But the fundamental document was the Declaration of Independence. I'd invite you as Jewish people to have a look at that Declaration of Independence, because what it really does is that it recognises the special role, the connection that the Jewish people have to that land and the connection they have to that land historically and the persecution they suffered after dispossession from that land. In returning to that land and re-establishing a sovereign state in the name of the Jewish people, the right of return of Jewish people to the land was preferred, and that is enshrined in the Israeli sovereign state. And so the notion, and that is provided for, granted equally to everybody. And so the notion that a people should be indigenous to a land and having suffered persecution and dispossession, they should then in some small measure or some way have enshrined in their sovereign document some preferment in order to reflect that indigenous connection and their suffering and persecution is not a foreign concept to Jewish people. On the contrary, it is one of the foundations of the state that the Jewish people resurrected after their own persecution and dispossession. Now, again, that doesn't mean you should vote yes. It simply means I'm saying this because I'm seeking to illustrate that the Jewish experience is not foreign to this issue, and that it is really, in my view, quite wrong to say that the proposal is inconsistent with Jewish values. I want to say one more thing about equality. And of course, it's a very powerful and persuasive argument to say that people should be treated equally. And of course, in ordinary circumstances, that should always be the case. It is a foundational premise of our justice system. But what does equal mean now? That's a difficult question, but I want to share with you one Mishnah, one part of the oral law. The oral law in the Ethics of the Fathers discusses different attributes and different attitudes to property. And the proposition is put that if you say that what you own is mine and what I own is mine, that's an evil person, a person who regards everything they had as belonging to them. But a person who regards what they have is theirs and what the other person has, in other words, if I say what is mine and what is yours, that is an average and noble position to take. However, the rabbis say in certain circumstances that can be called midat Sodom. That can be called the attribute of Sodom, as in Sodom and Gomorrah. That can be the manifestation of evil. Because if you impose equality on a system that is intrinsically inequitable, then all you're doing, is perpetuating inequality. And so one needs to be very careful, I suggest, about arguments that are based on, that appear to be based on the purity of equality, because sometimes measures need to be undertaken in Jewish thinking to redirect the balance to ensure equity within the broad sovereign state. So that, again, doesn't mean you should vote yes whether this particular proposal is the answer or the solution to the undoubted difficulties and blight that we face is a different issue. I'm simply pointing out that authentic Jewish values, as recorded in our own tradition, are careful about equality because it recognises that it's a very difficult and complex issue, and one can't simply resolve these issues by a sort of broad reference to the need for equality. There's much, much more I could say about that, including with reference to the dispute about judicial reform in Israel today, where equality is part of the dispute, but the time does not allow for it. I want to conclude with this, and that is the notion. It's interesting that the notion of a voice has been chosen as the measure by which this is sought to be advanced. And that is because the notion of a voice symbolically in Judaism is in fact the instrument of empowerment. We say the voice is, if you like, in traditional Jewish literature, going back to the Bible, the empowering tool of the Jewish people. Kol Yaakov, the voice is the voice of Jacob. We associate Jewish empowerment with a voice, not with weapons, not with swords, not with guns. Historically, our weapon of empowerment, or our tool, not a weapon, but our tool of empowerment, was a voice. And so the voice has great symbolism in Jewish tradition and Jewish history. And of course, we're now coming to the period of Rosh Hashanah, where it takes on an altogether, a different type of symbolism. And that is the Kol Shofar, the voice of the shofar, which is the ram's horn, which is the voice of introspection. And I want to conclude with that, because that piercing and penetrating voice of introspection, that we will hear over the New Year high holidays is designed to motivate us to think deeply about the problems that we face personally and about the problems that we share in the society in which we live. And in our penitential prayers that we say over this time, we take a communal position. We articulate our commonality with the society and community in which we live in confessing the problems that we face. They are all in plural, ashamnu bagadnu. We have sinned, we have fallen short, because whatever deficiencies there are in our society, we as Australians share them together and must take responsibility for them ourselves and share in the burden of remedying those difficulties and those deficiencies in our society. So whatever you're going to vote, and you'll hear very eloquent arguments about it, can I invite you and urge you, when you think about the voice, think of the voice of the shofar that penetrates your conscience, perhaps your preconceived prejudices, and allow yourself to think deeply about how you can share in the burden and the improvement of the society in which we live.
Many thanks indeed, Rabbi Solomon.